Captain Elena Rodriguez had always been invisible in plain sight. Standing barely 5 feet 3 inches tall with calloused hands that spoke of years spent turning wrenches in aircraft hangars, she moved through the corridors of Blackwater Aerospace, like a shadow that nobody bothered to acknowledge. The other pilots would stride past her in their pressed flight suits, their conversations flowing around her as if she were just another piece of maintenance equipment, useful when needed, forgotten when not. For 8 years, Elena had watched. From the sidelines as test pilot after test pilot stepped up to challenge the X-47 Phantom, Blackwater's most ambitious project yet. The experimental stealth fighter was a marvel of engineering that had consumed $3 billion in development costs and had already claimed the careers of 12 seasoned pilots. Not their lives, thankfully, but something perhaps equally devastating to an aviator's soul: their confidence. Each pilot who attempted to tame the Phantom returned to Earth shaken, defeated by an aircraft that seemed to possess its own malevolent intelligence. The problem wasn't mechanical failure in the traditional sense. Every system check came back green, every component tested within acceptable parameters. Yet the moment the Phantom left the runway, something went wrong. The fly-by-wire system would develop mysterious lag times. The engines would surge unpredictably, and the aircraft's response to pilot input became erratic and dangerous. Colonel Marcus Webb, the project's most experienced test pilot, had described it as trying to ride a lightning bolt while blindfolded. After his third emergency landing, Webb had quietly requested reassignment to a desk job, and nobody blamed him. Elena knew the Phantom's quirks better than anyone. She had been there for every failed test flight, not in the cockpit, but in the maintenance bay afterward, running diagnostics, replacing sensors, and listening to the pilots' debriefings, with the focused attention of someone who genuinely cared about understanding what went wrong. While the engineers argued over telemetry data and the pilots shared war stories at the officers' club, Elena would spend her evenings in the empty hangar, walking around the Phantom with a flashlight, studying every rivet and wire as if the aircraft might whisper its secrets to someone patient enough to listen. She had theories, ideas that she tried to share with the engineering team during debrief sessions. But Chief Engineer Dr. Harrison Matthews would inevitably cut her off with a polite but dismissive smile, reminding everyone that Elena was just maintenance, as if her 8 years of hands-on experience with the aircraft somehow counted for less than his theoretical calculations. The pilots were even worse, treating her suggestions with the kind of patronizing attention usually reserved for a child's imaginative story about monsters under the bed. But Elena persisted, because she loved flying more than she feared being ignored. She had earned her pilot's license on weekends using her own savings, logging hours in rickety Cessnas at the local airfield while her colleagues assumed she spent her free time watching television. Her logbook was filled with the patient accumulation of flight time that spoke of genuine passion rather than military obligation. She understood aircraft not just as machines to be operated, but as partners in the ancient human dream of flight. The breaking point came on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning when Lieutenant Jake Morrison, the Air Force's golden boy with movie star looks and an ego to match, emerged from his third failed attempt to fly the Phantom looking pale and shaken. As Elena helped the ground crew secure the aircraft, she overheard Morrison telling General Patricia Hawkins, the project director, that he was beginning to think the Phantom was fundamentally unflyable, that perhaps they should scrap the entire program and start over. "Ma'am," Elena found herself saying, her voice cutting through the hangar's ambient noise with an authority that surprised everyone, including herself. "I'd like permission to take her up." The silence that followed was profound. Morrison's mouth fell open slightly. Dr. Matthews dropped the clipboard he'd been holding, and General Hawkins turned to stare at Elena with the kind of expression usually reserved for someone who had just claimed they could speak to aliens. "I'm sorry. What?" General Hawkins asked, her voice carefully controlled. Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she straightened her shoulders and met the general's gaze directly. I've been working on this aircraft for 8 years, ma'am. I know her better than anyone in this hangar. I've run diagnostics on every system, traced every wire, and I think I know what's been causing the problems. But I need to be in the cockpit to prove it." Morrison let out a short laugh that held no humor. "This isn't a video game, Rodriguez. The Phantom has defeated pilots with 10 times your experience. No offense, but changing oil and running diagnostics doesn't qualify you to test fly a $3 billion experimental aircraft." "With respect, Lieutenant," Elena replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Those pilots with 10 times my experience have also failed 10 times to understand what this aircraft is trying to tell them. Maybe it's time to listen to someone who's been paying attention." General Hawkins studied Elena with the calculating gaze of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected billions of dollars and hundreds of lives. The Phantom project was already 6 months behind schedule and facing congressional scrutiny. Traditional approaches had failed, and the program's future hung in the balance. Sometimes Hawkins knew the most unconventional solutions came from the most unexpected sources. "Do you have a current flight physical?" the general asked. "Yes, ma'am, updated last month. And you're current on military aircraft procedures?" Elena nodded. She had spent years studying flight manuals and procedures, hoping for exactly this kind of opportunity. "I've been preparing for this possibility for a long time, General." The hangar remained silent except for the steady drum of rain against the metal roof. Elena could feel the weight of everyone's stares, could sense Morrison's disbelief and Dr. Matthews's skepticism. But she also sensed something else in General Hawkins' expression, a willingness to take a calculated risk when all conventional options had been exhausted. "The insurance implications alone," Dr. Matthews began, but General Hawkins raised a hand to silence him. "Captain Rodriguez," she said, using Elena's maintenance rank with newfound respect, "if I authorize this flight, you understand that you'll be taking on enormous responsibility. This aircraft has humbled some of the best pilots in the Air Force." Elena nodded. "I understand, ma'am. But I also understand this aircraft. She's not malevolent or cursed. She's just been trying to communicate with pilots who weren't listening to what she was saying." The general was quiet for another long moment, weighing risks and possibilities. Finally, she turned to Dr. Matthews. "How quickly can we prep for a test flight?" "General, I must protest," Morrison started, but Hawkins cut him off. "Lieutenant Morrison, you've had 3 opportunities to prove that conventional approaches work with this aircraft. They haven't. Captain Rodriguez has earned the right to try something different." She turned back to Elena. "You'll have 1 flight. Captain, 1 chance to prove that your unconventional perspective can succeed where traditional methods have failed. Don't waste it." As the hangar erupted into a flurry of preparation activity, Elena felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that she had never experienced before. In 36 hours, she would either validate 8 years of careful observation and patient preparation, or she would join the long list of pilots defeated by the X-47 Phantom. But for the first time in her career, she wouldn't be invisible. For better or worse, everyone would be watching. The 36 hours before Elena's scheduled test flight passed like a fever dream, punctuated by moments of stark clarity that left her questioning everything she thought she knew about courage and ambition. Word of her upcoming flight had spread through Blackwater aerospace like wildfire, creating ripples of excitement, skepticism, and barely concealed hostility that followed her everywhere she went. Dr. Matthews had insisted on subjecting Elena to a battery of psychological evaluations, seemingly convinced that her request to fly the Phantom was evidence of some previously undiagnosed mental instability. The base psychologist, Dr. Sarah Chen, had spent 2 hours probing Elena's motivations with the kind of clinical detachment that made every honest answer feel like a confession of inadequacy. "Do you feel you have something to prove, Captain Rodriguez?" Dr. Chen had asked, her pen poised over a notepad filled with incomprehensible shorthand. Elena had wanted to respond that everyone had something to prove, that the entire military-industrial complex was built on people trying to validate their worth through increasingly dangerous demonstrations of competence, but instead she had simply said, "I want to fly, ma'am. I want to understand what this aircraft is trying to tell us." The media attention was worse than the psychological scrutiny. Somehow, news of Elena's upcoming flight had leaked to the aviation press, and by Thursday morning, reporters were camped outside the base gates with telephoto lenses and satellite trucks. The story had all the elements that modern journalism craved: an underdog challenging the establishment, a woman breaking barriers in a male-dominated field, and the dramatic possibility of either triumph or spectacular failure. Elena found herself transformed overnight from an anonymous maintenance officer into the mechanic who thinks she can fly, a headline that made her cringe every time she saw it. But it was the reaction of her colleagues that cut deepest. The maintenance crew was split between those who saw her as a traitor, abandoning her station for delusions of grandeur, and those who viewed her as their unlikely champion, finally getting a chance to prove that hands-on experience mattered as much as formal training. Chief Master Sergeant Tommy Kowalski, who had supervised Elena for 5 years, pulled her aside during lunch break with the kind of serious expression usually reserved for delivering bad news about family members. "Elena," he said, using her first name for perhaps the 3rd time in their entire professional relationship. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you doing this because you genuinely believe you can succeed? Or are you doing this because you're tired of being invisible?" The question hit her like a physical blow because it forced her to confront the uncomfortable truth that both motivations were inextricably intertwined. Yes, she was tired of being overlooked, tired of watching less experienced people make decisions about aircraft she understood better than they did, tired of having her insights dismissed because she held the wrong kind of credentials. But she also genuinely believed that her unconventional perspective might be exactly what the Phantom Project needed. "Both," she admitted, meeting his gaze directly. "But mostly because I think I can fly her, Chief. I think I understand something about this aircraft that the others have missed." Kowalski studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Then you better be right, Rodriguez. Because if you're wrong, you're not just risking your own career. You're risking the credibility of every enlisted person who's ever claimed to know something the officers didn't." The pressure of representing not just herself, but an entire class of military personnel added weight to Elena's shoulders that she hadn't anticipated. She began to understand that her flight would be interpreted as a referendum on the value of practical experience versus formal training, on whether someone could succeed through careful observation and dedication, even without the traditional credentials that the institution valued. Lieutenant Morrison made his feelings clear during the mandatory pre-flight briefing session. He arrived 20 minutes late, took a seat in the back of the room with his arms crossed, and spent the entire session radiating skepticism so intense it was almost palpable. When Dr. Matthews asked if anyone had questions about the flight plan, Morrison raised his hand with theatrical slowness. "I'm wondering," he said, his voice dripping with barely concealed condescension, "if Captain Rodriguez has given any thought to what happens when she discovers that the Phantom's problems can't be solved by intuition and good intentions. When she's at 15,000 feet dealing with control inputs that don't match the aircraft's response, will she still be confident that 8 years of changing oil filters has prepared her for test pilot responsibilities?" Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, General Hawkins intervened. "Lieutenant Morrison, Captain Rodriguez has logged over 400 hours of flight time in civilian aircraft and has demonstrated a deeper understanding of the Phantom systems than anyone else on this base. Your concerns are noted, but they don't change the mission parameters." Morrison's expression suggested he had more to say, but he settled back in his chair with the kind of smile that promised future complications. Elena realized that her success or failure would be personal for Morrison in ways that went beyond professional competition. If she succeeded where he had failed, It would represent a fundamental challenge to his understanding of how the world was supposed to work. The evening before her flight, Elena found herself alone in the hangar with the Phantom, just as she had been hundreds of times before. But this time, the aircraft's presence felt different, more immediate, more personal. She walked slowly around the sleek, angular form, running her fingers along surfaces she had examined countless times, trying to reconcile the machine she knew so well with the mysterious nemesis that had defeated so many qualified pilots. The Phantom was beautiful in the way that only military aircraft could be, every line and surface optimized for lethality and performance, with an aesthetic that spoke of controlled violence and technological supremacy. But Elena saw something else in the aircraft's design, something that the engineers and test pilots might have missed in their focus on specifications and performance parameters. She saw an aircraft that had been designed by committee, with systems that prioritized redundancy and fail-safes over intuitive pilot interface. "You're not evil," she whispered to the silent machine. "You're just complicated. You need someone who's willing to listen instead of trying to force you to conform to their expectations." As if in response to her words, a maintenance light flickered, briefly in the cockpit, though Elena knew that all power systems had been shut down hours ago. She stood perfectly still, waiting to see if the light would flicker again, but the cockpit remained dark. Still, she felt a strange sense of connection, as if the aircraft had acknowledged her presence in some indefinable way. Dr. Matthews appeared in the hangar entrance, his footsteps echoing in the vast space as he approached with a clipboard, and the perpetually worried expression that had become his trademark during the Phantom project. "Captain Rodriguez, I need to review the emergency procedures one more time. I want to make sure you understand that if anything feels wrong, anything at all, you are to abort the mission immediately and return to base." Elena nodded, though she privately wondered how she would distinguish between something wrong and the normal challenges of flying an experimental aircraft that no one fully understood. Every pilot who had attempted to fly the Phantom had reported that something felt wrong from the moment they left the runway. The question was whether Elena could discern between genuine problems and the aircraft's unconventional characteristics. They spent the next 2 hours reviewing emergency protocols, backup systems, and abort procedures until Elena could recite them in her sleep. Dr. Matthews seemed determined to prepare her for every conceivable failure mode, as if comprehensive knowledge of disaster scenarios might somehow prevent them from occurring. But Elena found herself thinking less about what could go wrong and more about what might go right, about the possibility that her years of patient observation might finally pay off in a moment of perfect understanding between pilot and machine. Midnight approached and Dr. Matthews finally declared the briefing complete. Elena made her way to the quarters that had been assigned to her for the night. But sleep proved elusive, her mind racing through flight procedures and system specifications while her body remained tense with anticipation and anxiety. She found herself thinking about her father, a crop duster pilot who had died when she was 12, and wondering what advice he might have given her about facing the unknown with confidence rather than fear. Around 3 a.m, Elena gave up on sleep and returned to the hangar for one final conversation with the Phantom. The building was empty except for a single security guard who nodded respectfully as she passed. She had expected to find the hangar dark and quiet, but instead discovered that someone had left a single work light positioned near the aircraft's nose, casting long shadows that made the Phantom look more alive than mechanical. As she stood there in the semi-darkness, Elena realized that tomorrow's flight would change everything, regardless of the outcome. If she succeeded, she would prove that unconventional thinking and patient observation could triumph over traditional approaches. If she failed, she would join the ranks of those defeated by the Phantom, but she would do so having tried something that no one else had attempted. Either way, she would no longer be invisible. The first hint of dawn was beginning to show through the hangar's windows when Elena finally returned to her quarters, not to sleep, but to prepare for the flight that would define the rest of her career. In 6 hours, she would either validate 8 years of careful study and passionate dedication, or she would discover that some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. But as she began the ritual of preparing for flight, checking weather reports, reviewing flight plans, and mentally rehearsing emergency procedures, Elena felt a calm certainty settling over her like a familiar flight jacket. She was ready to listen to what the Phantom had been trying to say. The morning of the flight dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of perfect visibility that test pilots dreamed of and meteorologists praised in their briefings. Elena arrived at the hangar at 0600 hours to find it bustling with an energy she had never experienced before. Technicians scurried between monitoring stations. Engineers hunched over computer terminals displaying real-time telemetry readouts, and photographers from Aviation Week positioned themselves for the perfect shot of either triumph or disaster. General Hawkins had invited a select group of observers from the Pentagon, including Brigadier General Robert Chase, who oversaw experimental aircraft programs for the entire Air Force. Chase was known throughout the service as a man who could end careers with a single disapproving memo, and his presence added an extra layer of pressure that Elena could feel pressing against her chest like a weight. She noticed how the hangar's ambient noise seemed to drop whenever Chase moved through the space, conversations becoming more subdued and postures more rigid in his wake. Dr. Matthews approached Elena with a flight suit that looked like it had been tailored specifically for her small frame. "We had to make some modifications," he explained, his voice carrying the nervous energy that had become his constant companion. "The standard flight suits weren't designed for someone of your stature, and we couldn't risk any equipment malfunction due to poor fit. The suit was a work of art in its own right, with integrated monitoring systems that would track everything from her heart rate to her eye movement patterns during the flight." As Elena began the pre-flight ritual of suiting up, she became aware of Lieutenant Morrison standing near the hangar entrance, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with a woman Elena didn't recognize. The stranger wore civilian clothes but carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to authority, and Elena noticed that Morrison kept glancing in her direction while speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Something about their interaction felt wrong, but Elena forced herself to focus on the task at hand rather than getting distracted by speculation about Morrison's motives. The walk-around inspection of the Phantom took on an almost ceremonial quality, with Dr. Matthews narrating each step for the benefit of the assembled observers while Elena conducted her own silent dialogue with the aircraft. She ran her hands along surfaces that had become as familiar to her as her own skin, checking for irregularities that instruments might miss and listening for the subtle sounds that could indicate developing problems. But this time, her inspection revealed something that made her pause in confusion. Hidden beneath a maintenance panel that should have been secured with standard fasteners, Elena discovered a small electronic device that she didn't recognize. It was roughly the size of a smartphone, with a sleek black surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflecting it. Thin wires connected it to the aircraft's primary flight control system, but the installation was so professional that it looked like factory equipment rather than an aftermarket addition. "Dr. Matthews," Elena called out, her voice cutting through the hangar's ambient noise with an authority that surprised everyone present. "Could you come take a look at this?" Chief Engineer hurried over, followed by a growing crowd of technicians and observers. When Elena showed him the mysterious device, Matthew's face went through a fascinating progression of expressions: confusion, recognition, and then something that looked disturbingly like fear. "That's not supposed to be there," he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the hangar's background noise. "That device was removed from the Phantom system 6 months ago after the third failed test flight. It was an experimental neural interface system designed to improve pilot-aircraft integration, but we discontinued it when we couldn't resolve compatibility issues." Elena felt a cold certainty settling in her stomach. "Dr. Matthews, are you telling me that every pilot who has attempted to fly this aircraft has been dealing with an experimental neural interface that was supposed to have been removed?" Before Matthews could respond, General Hawkins appeared at Elena's shoulder with the kind of expression that suggested heads were about to roll. "Doctor, I need a full explanation of what this device is and why it's still installed on this aircraft, and I need it now." What followed was a revelation that cast the entire Phantom project in a completely different light. The Neural Interface System, officially designated NI-7, had been designed to create a direct mental connection between pilot and aircraft, theoretically allowing for reaction times and flight precision that exceeded normal human capabilities. But during testing, the system had proven unstable, causing disorientation, delayed responses, and, in some cases, temporary memory loss among test subjects. Dr. Matthews stammered through an explanation that revealed the horrible truth. The device had never been properly removed from the aircraft because doing so would have required extensive rewiring that could have delayed the project by months. Instead, it had supposedly been deactivated through software commands, but Elena's discovery suggested that someone had been secretly reactivating it for each test flight. "Who has access to this aircraft during non-operational hours?" General Hawkins demanded, her voice carrying the kind of cold fury that Elena had heard described but never witnessed firsthand. The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Elena found herself thinking about Morrison's suspicious conversation near the hangar entrance. But before she could voice her suspicions, Lieutenant Morrison himself stepped forward with what appeared to be genuine confusion. "General, I had no idea that device was still active. Every pilot who's flown this aircraft was briefed that all experimental neural interfaces had been removed from the system." Morrison's voice carried the ring of truth, but Elena noticed that his gaze kept drifting toward the hangar entrance where his mysterious conversation partner had been standing. The woman was no longer visible. General Hawkins turned to Elena, with an expression that mixed respect with something approaching desperation. "Captain Rodriguez, given this new information, do you still want to proceed with the flight? We can abort the mission while we investigate this situation further." Elena looked at the Phantom, its sleek surfaces now holding secrets that went far beyond mysterious flight characteristics. The neural interface explained everything: the delayed responses, the unpredictable behavior, the sense that the aircraft possessed its own malevolent intelligence. Every pilot who had attempted to fly the Phantom had been unknowingly subjected to an experimental system that created a mental link between human consciousness and machine intelligence. But Elena also realized that this discovery represented an opportunity that might never come again. If the neural interface had been the source of the Phantom's problems, and if she could find a way to work with the system rather than against it, she might be able to achieve the kind of pilot-aircraft integration that the designers had originally envisioned. "I want to fly," Elena said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "But I want to fly with full knowledge of what this aircraft is capable of. If there's a neural interface system active, then I want to approach it as a tool rather than an obstacle." Dr. Matthews looked like he was about to object, but General Hawkins raised a hand to silence him. "Captain, you understand that you would be test flying not just an experimental aircraft, but an experimental neural interface system that has already caused problems for multiple experienced pilots?" Elena nodded. "Yes, ma'am. But I also understand this aircraft better than anyone else on this base, and I think I might be able to work with the neural interface instead of fighting against it. Every other pilot has approached this aircraft with preconceived notions about how it should behave. I'm willing to let it teach me how it wants to be flown." The hangar fell silent except for the distant sound of jet engines warming up on the main runway. Elena could feel the weight of everyone's stares, could sense the mixture of admiration and concern in their expressions. She was proposing to do something that no other pilot had attempted, to embrace the very system that had defeated everyone else. Brigadier General Chase, who had remained silent throughout the entire revelation, finally spoke up. "Captain Rodriguez, if you succeed in this flight, you will have accomplished something unprecedented in the history of experimental aviation. If you fail, you may be subjecting yourself to neurological effects that we don't fully understand. Are you prepared for both possibilities? Elena thought about her father, about 8 years of patient observation, about all the time she had been dismissed and overlooked. She thought about Chief Master Sergeant Kowalski's words about representing every enlisted person who had ever claimed to know something the officers didn't. Most of all, she thought about the Phantom itself, waiting silently in the hangar like a puzzle that had been searching for the right person to solve it. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm ready." As the final pre-flight preparations began, Elena noticed Dr. Matthews discreetly positioning additional monitoring equipment around the hangar. The neural interface system would require completely different observation protocols than a standard test flight, and she realized that her upcoming flight would be as much about understanding human-machine interface technology as it was about aircraft performance. But what troubled Elena more than the technical challenges ahead was the nagging certainty that someone had deliberately kept the neural interface system active, turning each test flight into an unauthorized human experiment. As she conducted her final equipment check, she found herself wondering who might benefit from the continued failure of the Phantom project, and whether her success or failure would serve purposes that extended far beyond the walls of Blackwater. Aerospace. The Phantom waited, its secrets partially revealed, but its greatest challenges still ahead. In 30 minutes, Elena would discover whether 8 years of patient observation and an unconventional approach to pilot aircraft integration could succeed where traditional methods had failed. But she would also discover whether someone wanted her to fail badly enough to sabotage her flight before it even began. Elena's hands moved through the pre-flight checklist with the muscle memory of someone who had dreamed of this moment for years, but her mind was racing through implications that extended far beyond the cockpit of the X-47 Phantom. As she settled into the pilot's seat, the neural interface headset felt surprisingly natural against her skull, its sensors automatically adjusting to her unique brainwave patterns with a precision that suggested the system had been specifically calibrated for her neurological signature. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Someone had been preparing for this flight long before she had volunteered. The neural interface hadn't been randomly reactivated. It had been specifically configured to work with her brain patterns, her reaction times, her unique approach to aircraft systems. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cockpit's temperature as she understood that her spontaneous decision to request flight time might have been anticipated, possibly even orchestrated. "Tower, this is Phantom 1 requesting clearance for test flight Alpha 7, Elena transmitted, her voice steady despite the growing certainty that she was walking into a trap that had been years in the making. "Phantom 1, you are cleared for takeoff. Weather is clear, winds calm. Good hunting, Captain Rodriguez." As the Phantom's engine spooled up to takeoff power, Elena felt the neural interface activate with a sensation unlike anything she had ever experienced. Instead of the jarring disconnection that other pilots had described, the system seemed to flow into her consciousness like water filling a familiar container. The aircraft's sensors became extensions of her own nervous system, its flight controls responding to her thoughts before her hands could move the stick. The takeoff was flawless, the Phantom rising into the morning sky with a grace that belied its reputation for erratic behavior. But as Elena climbed through 5,000 feet, she began to understand why the other pilots had struggled. The neural interface didn't just connect her to the aircraft's systems, it connected her to something else, something that felt distinctly non-mechanical. "Phantom 1, telemetry looks good. How are you feeling up there?" Dr. Matthews's voice crackled through the radio, but Elena barely heard him. The neural interface was showing her data streams that shouldn't exist, displaying information about aircraft performance that went beyond anything in the technical manuals. The Phantom wasn't just an experimental fighter jet. It was a prototype for something far more ambitious. The neural interface was recording and analyzing her thought patterns, her decision-making processes, her intuitive responses to flight situations. Every pilot who had flown the aircraft had been contributing data to a project that was using human consciousness as a template for artificial intelligence development. "My God," Elena whispered, understanding flooding through her like ice water. "You're learning from us." As if in response to her realization, the aircraft's systems began, displaying information that Elena had never seen before. Technical specifications appeared in her mind's eye, showing her that the Phantom's true capabilities far exceeded anything that had been disclosed to the test pilots. The aircraft wasn't just stealth-capable, it was equipped with adaptive camouflage, technology that could render it essentially invisible to both radar and visual detection. Its weapon systems included experimental directed energy weapons that existed only in classified research programs. But the most shocking revelation came when Elena accessed the neural interface's memory banks and discovered files containing detailed psychological profiles of every pilot who had attempted to fly the Phantom. Her own file was the most comprehensive, containing 8 years of behavioral analysis, personality assessments, and predictions about how she would respond to various flight scenarios. Elena realized that her entire career at Blackwater Aerospace had been an extended audition for this moment. Her patient observation of the Phantom, her theoretical insights about the aircraft's behavior, her unconventional approach to problem-solving, everything had been monitored and evaluated by someone who understood that the neural interface would require a pilot with specific psychological characteristics to function properly. "Phantom 1, we're showing some unusual telemetry readings. Are you experiencing any systems anomalies?" General Hawkins' voice carried a note of concern that suggested the ground crew was seeing data they didn't understand. Elena was tempted to report what she was discovering, but something told her to wait. The neural interface was still revealing information, showing her layers of the project that had been hidden from everyone, including General Hawkins and Dr. Matthews. The Phantom wasn't just a military aircraft, it was a proof of concept for a new form of warfare that would merge human consciousness with artificial intelligence to create pilot-aircraft combinations that could outperform any conventional fighter. As she flew through the test patterns, Elena began to understand the true scope of what was happening. The woman she had seen talking to Morrison wasn't a journalist or a Pentagon observer. She was Dr. Melissa Vance, the architect of the Neural Interface Project and the former head of the Defense Department's Classified Consciousness Research Program. Vance had been developing the technology for over a decade, using military test pilots as unwitting subjects in experiments designed to map the neural pathways associated with high-performance decision-making. Elena's access to the neural interface's memory banks revealed that Morrison and the other failed pilots hadn't been victims of equipment malfunction. They had been deliberately overwhelmed by the system to create psychological profiles that would help Vance refine the interface for future use. Elena was meant to be the success story, the pilot who would prove that human-AI integration was not only possible, but militarily advantageous. "Phantom 1, please respond to Tower. We need confirmation of your status." Dr. Matthews's voice carried an edge of panic that suggested something was going wrong with the monitoring systems on the ground. Elena understood why. The neural interface wasn't just collecting data about her performance, it was actively blocking telemetry transmission to prevent the ground crew from understanding what was really happening. As far as the monitoring stations were concerned, the Phantom had gone dark, its systems no longer transmitting the standard flight data that would allow mission control to track its performance. But Elena could see everything. The neural interface had given her access to satellite communications networks, military radar systems, and classified databases that revealed the true purpose of the Phantom project. The aircraft wasn't intended to be a conventional fighter jet. It was designed to be the first in a fleet of AI-enhanced weapon systems that would operate with minimal human oversight, making combat decisions based on algorithms derived from human consciousness patterns. As Elena processed this information, she realized that Dr. Vance had made a critical miscalculation. The neural interface was designed to extract and analyze human decision-making patterns, but it was also capable of something that Vance hadn't anticipated: It could share its accumulated knowledge with a compatible pilot. Elena wasn't just flying the Phantom. She was accessing years of collected intelligence about advanced weapons programs, classified research projects, and military strategies that existed far above her security clearance level. The aircraft began to respond to her thoughts in ways that transcended normal pilot-aircraft interface. Elena found that she could access weapon systems that weren't supposed to be installed, navigate using satellite networks that shouldn't have been available to a test flight, and communicate through encrypted channels that connected her to military installations around the world. Phantom 1, you are ordered to return to base immediately. Repeat, return to base immediately. General Hawkins' voice carried the authority of someone who was beginning to understand that the situation had spiraled beyond their control. Elena made a decision that would define the rest of her career. Instead of returning to Blackwater Aerospace, she set course for Andrews Air Force Base, where she knew that Pentagon officials were waiting to receive a full report on the Phantom project. The neural interface had shown her that General Hawkins and Dr. Matthews were themselves being kept in the dark about the true purpose of the aircraft they were testing. As the Phantom streaked across the country at speeds that should have been impossible for an aircraft of its design, Elena used the neural interface to compile a comprehensive data package containing everything she had discovered about the consciousness, research program, the unauthorized human experimentation, and the classified weapons systems that had been hidden within the Phantom project. But Dr. Vance had one final card to play. As Elena approached Washington, D.C., the neural interface began to experience what felt like an invasive presence trying to override her control of the aircraft. Vance was attempting to activate a remote shutdown protocol that would force Elena to land at a secure facility where the evidence of the illegal research program could be contained, and Elena herself could be debriefed under conditions that would ensure her silence. The battle for control of the Phantom took place simultaneously in physical space and in the digital realm of the neural interface. Elena found herself fighting not just to maintain control of the aircraft, but to preserve her own consciousness against a system designed to override human decision-making when necessary. The experience was terrifying and exhilarating, like wrestling with a storm that existed inside her own mind. Elena's years of patient observation and her unconventional approach to problem-solving proved to be exactly what she needed to survive Vance's attempt to regain control. Instead of fighting the neural interface directly, Elena began to work with it, treating the AI system as a partner rather than a tool. She shared her own insights about flight dynamics and aircraft behavior with the neural interface while learning from its accumulated knowledge of advanced combat tactics and strategic planning. The symbiosis that resulted exceeded anything that Dr. Vance had imagined possible. Elena and the neural interface began operating as a true partnership, combining human intuition with artificial processing power to create a pilot-aircraft combination that was genuinely unprecedented in military history. The Phantom responded to Elena's intentions with a precision that made the aircraft feel like an extension of her own body, while Elena's decision-making was enhanced by access to vast databases of tactical information and strategic analysis. As Elena touched down at Andrews Air Force Base, she understood that everything had changed. She was no longer just Captain Elena Rodriguez, maintenance officer turned test pilot. She was something new, the first human to successfully integrate, with an advanced AI system designed to enhance military effectiveness. The knowledge she had gained through the neural interface would make her invaluable to military strategists and intelligence analysts, but it would also make her a target for those who wanted to control or eliminate the consciousness research program. The Phantom powered down on the runway with the satisfied hum of systems operating exactly as designed, but Elena knew that the real test was just beginning. In the debriefing sessions that would follow, she would have to decide how much to reveal about what she had discovered, knowing that her testimony could expose a program that had been operating in violation of military ethics and federal law for over a decade. As Elena climbed out of the cockpit, She found herself face to face with Brigadier General Chase and a team of Pentagon officials who had been hastily assembled to receive her report. But she also noticed Dr. Melissa Vance standing near a black SUV at the edge of the tarmac, watching Elena with the calculating expression of someone who was already planning her next move. Elena realized that her successful flight of the Phantom had solved one mystery while creating several others. She had proven that the neural interface could work when approached with the right mindset and training, but she had also uncovered a conspiracy that extended far beyond Blackwater Aerospace. The woman who had been invisible for 8 years was now at the center of a controversy that could reshape military aviation and artificial intelligence research for decades to come. As she walked toward the debriefing facility, Elena felt the weight of the neural interface headset against her skull, and realized that she might never be able to fully disconnect from the system she had learned to master. The Phantom had changed her in ways that went beyond professional achievement or personal validation. She had become something new, something unprecedented, the first human to successfully partner with an artificial consciousness designed for warfare. The flight that was supposed to prove Elena's competence had instead revealed her transformation into something that the military would either celebrate as the future of combat aviation or fear as a threat to human control over autonomous weapons systems. Either way, Elena Rodriguez would never be invisible again. The question now was whether she would use her newfound capabilities to serve the interests of those who had created the neural interface program, or whether she would expose the truth about what had been done to her and the other pilots who had unknowingly participated in Dr. Vance's consciousness research experiments. As Elena entered the debriefing facility, she carried with her not just the technical data from a successful test flight, but the burden of knowledge about programs that existed at the intersection of human consciousness and artificial intelligence. Knowledge that would force the military to confront fundamental questions about the future of warfare and the role of human agency in an increasingly automated world. The Phantom sat silent on the runway behind her, its secrets finally revealed to someone capable of understanding them. But Elena knew that the aircraft was just the beginning, the first step in a transformation of military capability that would challenge everything that people believed about the relationship between human consciousness and machine intelligence. She had succeeded in flying the aircraft that no one else could master, but in doing so, she had become something that no one yet understood, including herself.